Welcome back to the next episode of Marketing Masters. I'm the the de facto host here, Joe McNamara, and sitting here with me is one of the best marketing professionals and just overall people that I've ever had the chance to cross paths with, George Thomas. Most folks probably know you in some way, sort, or form just through your involvement with HubSpot and the larger community there. But I think that there's a lot more that once you kind of get under the hood of George B. Thomas that most folks probably aren't as familiar with. And so, George, before I start peppering you with questions, I know that I did kind of a quick intro there, but what else would you add in terms of who you are and why we're talking today?
Yeah, I mean, listen, at the end of the day, father, husband, marketer, nerd, have really made a choice a little bit over a decade ago that I never thought I would make, which it directly goes to this conversation of like, I want to be a marketer when I grow up. I had not said that until a very interesting thing happened. And honestly, there was a massive shift in my brain from what I thought to what I then thought moving forward. But, it's funny because you asked me the question, like, what would I add in there? I mean, I'm just a guy, right? I'm just a human. I'm trying to help humans be better humans. And I happen to do that, Joe, helping humans be better humans in a digital world using a software called HubSpot. And it's radical education. It's always focusing on what's in it for them. It's always being honest in the sales process, in the marketing process. And one of the things I've learned over, especially the last year and a half, is being a good human shouldn't be a business differentiator. But Joe, being a good human is a business differentiator.
It really is, right? And you bring up a really good point. You mentioned, and I want to get back to that so that we can elaborate, right? Because I completely agree. At the end of the day, I don't think that there's a higher premium or value on just brutal transparency and honesty from a place of support and love than there's ever been. But you brought up a good point, right? And that is, you've been in this space now for the better part of a decade plus. And, the question that I posed to you right before we hit the record button here, really stems from, where you've been to where you are, just around, the preconceived notions of, what you set out to do versus what you've kind of learned along the way that's helped really define and kind of direct your path in terms of, what you're doing today and ultimately where you want to go.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is, in 2012, I was a designer, developer, and what I like to say, a recovering youth pastor. And I like to be nerdy. I like to design stuff. I like to create websites. I even had done some video editing even back in the day. And we're talking like 2010, 2011, before video was even cool. We were doing it for some charter schools in Florida. And then I went to this event called Inbound. It's put on by a company called HubSpot. And I heard these words, Joe. I heard, don't call me a customer, call me human. And here's the thing. Before hearing those words, if you were to ask me, hey, what do you think of marketing? I would have been like, it's a sham. It's a crap. Like, it's just bullcrap. People say pretty words to make me feel a certain way so that I'll buy their junk. And I would have like aligned marketing with like your used car salesman, the worst dentist that you've ever met in your life. And it just wasn't something appealing to that I would ever want to be part of or try to do. And it was almost back in those days, it was almost a little mystical too. Like you weren't really sure what marketing was or wasn't. But then I heard those words, don't call me customer, call me human. And I set out on this path to figure out as much as humanly possible around what is marketing? Why is marketing important? Like what's happening in a digital world? Because by the way, we are quickly moving in 2012 out of print and magazines and billboards, and nobody answers their phone anymore because we've got caller ID. We started to get ad blockers at that point, and like the internet was becoming rich enough where we're just like, I think of like the Twisted Sister song, "We're not gonna take it," right? The consumer was like, we're not gonna take it anymore. And so I was like, let me dive into this world. And so a couple things. When I first dove into being a marketer, Joe, that I think is really important is I was uneducated around the topics, best practices, principles. I'm a designer developer. Now, do I use some of those traits in my everyday work? Absolutely. Video editing, do I use that? Absolutely. Podcast editing, I use it. But it was like, I need to learn the fundamentals of marketing and of this thing called HubSpot. And so one thing that I talk to everybody about is like, listen, you've got to educate. And I even went through like this 6 to 7 year period where I would aggressively say education trumps entertainment. The fact that you spend more time in Netflix instead of a book, instead of a course, instead of a and one time that even got me in trouble. My wife was like, listen, why are you yelling at your friend? Not everybody is built like you. Your friend wants to watch Netflix. Knock it off. But you have to educate yourself on the thing that you want to do. And if you're trying to do great marketing, then you have to educate yourself around those things. The other thing, too, that I had fundamentally been built a different way is you've got to be able to look at different perspectives, right? We talk about in the marketing realm this thing called buyer's journey and understanding what these journeys these people are going on. But if you grew up a certain way, have always lived a certain way, and I've always been this one type of person, how are you going to actually see that journey in anybody's eyes but your own? And what's fun is I've been everything from a bouncer at a bar to a district manager of a furniture store to a pizza delivery guy to like I've lived probably about 50 lives in one life. And so when I was able to take what historically had been like a geesh, do I even know what I'm doing with my life and apply it to marketing and go, oh, well, I know how that guy would feel. I know how this guy would feel. I even know how this guy would look at that messaging and think about it. So I was able to like get a 360-degree view of the things we were trying to do. Now, if I break that down to a simple principle, it's if you're a marketer and you're trying to educate yourself and you're trying to be great at this, then you also want to add in a layer of empathy and understanding to the people that you're actually trying to serve. By the way, that's a key word I just slipped in there. I didn't say sell or help sales or sales sell something. I said serve. This is another thing that I learned along the way is the way that you can be a great marketer is you can focus on serving your sales team, serving the organization, serving the prospects, leads, and customers, because you come with a different mindset if you're there to serve. You're there to add value. You're there to change lives. Your focus becomes so streamlined and simple because now you can look at yourself in the mirror and be like, I'm a marketer. I'm focused on the human and I'm trying to eradicate hurdles or help them reach an aspirational point. And if that's what you know, the two things that you're trying to do with every piece of content, every lead conversion opportunity, every sales enablement, tool that you give to your teams, you're just coming from a way different place than what typical marketers would come from. So now if I go back to your question, I went from somebody who knows nothing about marketing, drudged my way through over a 10 plus year journey of learning everything about marketing, plugging in everything about sales, trying to learn everything about service, and really even graduating from like, yes, you have a marketing mind and foundation, but you are really a rev ops focused person. How does the entire process work for the entire organization? How do you help not just marketers be more human, but sales reps be more human, service reps be more human? Literally at Inbound this year, my talk was 6 reasons your sales enablement strategy sucks, because literally the universe, right? The ecosystem that I'm in is like, hey, let's get this guy to talk about. Now, here's the thing. Part of your question was like where you're at now. Where I'm at now is, instead of listening to everybody to learn, I'm at a place where people are listening to me to learn. And it's because of this education. It's because of the testing along the way. It's because of the different angle. Instead of just focusing on process and platform, I'm focusing on people first, that then we can build a process around and leverage a platform to do the things that we need to do.
Bingo. Yeah, and like the one piece that I would add to that, George, is it's spot on, right? Like when you start to peel back the layers, what you realize is, regardless of platform, regardless of process, at the end of the day, it's all more or less a tool set, right? And so figuring out, to your point, who's going to wield that tool and how they intend to wield it, I would argue is like 90% of the conversation, right? And then the remaining 10%, give or take, is essentially the tactical execution. Here's how we're going to deploy it. Here's how we're going to enable the folks to be able to utilize this. But ultimately, it gets back to kind of, where your home is, and that is, you got to focus on the people. You got to focus on the reality of the situation. From a theoretical stance, yes, like you could get this platform and all the bells and whistles to ring and sing just like you want them to. But in a lot of sense, that equation does not necessarily take into account the human element, right? And being able to empathize with not only your audience, right? And I want to talk to you a little bit more about how you've created, in my opinion, some of the best content that's out there, and how that's helping kind of drive the relationship between lead gen as well as education. But, to kind of summarize that point, to me, it's just as critical to take into consideration that human element, whether it's internal within your teams and building those processes and how you're going to utilize that platform, as it is, identifying, back to what you were talking about, the buyer personas, right? And like figuring out, all right, here's how we're going to identify and kind of characterize this particular audience set, right? And again, keeping it as humanly possible to a realistic outcome.
Yeah, it's funny because there's a couple of things as I hear you kind of talk. Everybody wants to be strategical and tactical, and that's great. Like, you can talk about strategy, you can talk about tactics, you need it, and they need to be done. But there's this other layer of like your mission and your vision and your values that you have to allow to play at the greatest strengths that they can play. So one of the things, and it's simple, but when I'm talking about a lot of marketing tactics, I'll literally have to take a minute and be like, hey, listen, when you're doing this, it's less of a sledgehammer, more of a scalpel. Because I want people to realize how like micro, we're doctors, we're surgeons, we're doing something at a very micro level that is going to impact the emotion, the trust, the reciprocity in their mind and their heart, that will then unlock the wallet for the later conversation around sales. But we're doing strategy tactics to immediately get to the jugular and sales. And there's like, you have to date somebody for a while, give them an appetizer, give them a glass of wine, like buy them a decent steak, and then be like, hey, you want to get married? But we're really bad at looking at the long game as humans. And I think sometimes that's because we're fearful of our own consistency in the strategy and the tactics that we have to do for a longer period of time to get to that thing. And the other thing, too, that drives me nuts about being a marketer, and I battle against this, and I think it's why you can say what you say as far as like you might have the best content out there, is we feel like we have to measure everything. And if it doesn't have 3,000 likes in the first 30 minutes, then it was a failure and we're never, ever going to create it again. And there is a mindset that I've taken to content creation, standing on stages, or doing any type of educational thing that I do. And I'm like, one is enough. One human is enough. One view is enough. One audience member is enough. I'm going to deliver on camera, on stage, wherever I'm at, like it's a packed freaking house, even if it just is one. And what that allows you to do is actually educate, talk, conversate around the things that you're passionate about, the things that you know truly will move the needle, the things that you know, if even you got a handful of people to do, you would change organizations, you would change, towns, cities, states, because of the spark that you're adding into it. And here's the thing, as marketers, if you think about what I just said, marketers, many times we're focused on top of the funnel. I need all the eyeballs I can get, which really you don't. You need 10 of the right eyeballs that will buy 10 of your $50,000 widgets. That's really what you need. So why are you playing this game up here with a great chasm or divide and not even be able to get to the right people? And so I always look at the conversations that I want to have. I want to make sure that it pulls in the right people to hear. So I don't care if it's 1, 2, 5, 10. Like if it's thousands, great. But I'm not playing that eyeball game. I'm playing that, how do I get to the heart? How do I get to the mind, to the right people so they make the right decisions and really impact their organizations, impact their world? Because if they impact their organizations and their world, then I'm impacting the world. And by the way, that again is another metric that I think some humans play by that I really don't play by anymore. Back in the day, sure, the metric was success. Am I successful? When you change your mind as a human being, or a marketer in this case that we're talking to the significance, am I significant in the lives of those around me or those who meet me? You are willing to do completely different things with the content you create, with the education you provide, and the way that you just fundamentally walk the planet, and how you do that with other humans.
Well, and to that point, George, it's a refreshing, point of view, especially for those of us like, my background has been almost completely B2B, right? And so thinking about, hey, and again, I find myself having this conversation time and time again where, yes, at the grand scheme or kind of the highest level, yes, you can bucket it as, we're in B2B marketing. But again, business entities themselves they're not standalone, right? And as soon as you start to peel back the layers, you start to understand and realize very quickly, like, yeah, at the end of the day, I might have, an audience of 2 or 3 or 4, maybe 10 that I really have to appeal to, right? And like that's kind of like the major tenets of like account-based marketing, right? And certainly what we've seen from a trends perspective of us kind of moving in that direction. But your point is spot on, because I think if you were to ask the majority of businesses, especially founders or CEOs, you say, hey, strip away all of the expectations, the metrics, the reports. What is it that you set out to go do? What was it that you wanted to go accomplish? I think it aligns a lot more with what you're talking about, where, hey, I want to be significant. I want to be able to, make a difference in the lives of X, or move the needle in this sense, from a perspective of, whether it's a service or a product or whatever it is that I'm bringing to market, whatever value I'm bringing to bear. And a lot of times I feel like that gets really lost as soon as you start adding in, okay, but how successful are we going to be? How significant can we be? And again, like there are certain areas and aspects where you kind of want to track performance over time, but I agree with you. It's not a zero-sum game. And so figuring out, to your point, if I can take the same energy and the same, I guess, approach to, speaking to one person, the same way that I would to get up for 1,000 people, I think that generates just an immeasurable amount of value, right? Because the same time you're taking that approach of really closing that gap. And I know, we've been kind of talking about, how you do that from an audience perspective, but really it comes to break it down into a sense of like a reminder that, hey, I'm a human being, you're a human being. We have needs, fears, wants, There are things that keep us up at night, and especially when we're looking from a professional or a business perspective. I want to be able to first identify and empathize with what those are. And then how can I work with you? How can I be, and there's that word again, service. How can I be of service where, I'm able to come and support your efforts to overcome this challenge or to, accomplish what it is that you set out to go do. And sure, like if it comes with, to your point, a $50,000 widget, great, right? Like that keeps the lights on. That keeps me in business so that I can go and replicate that and do that again for somebody else. And I think having that approach over, well, we missed our quarterly financials, right? Or like we're dragging behind. We have to do something. We've got to change it up. It's just a completely different driving force, right?
Yeah. So there's a couple things I have to unpack with that piece that you just laid down there, which I think is fantastic, and people should rewind and probably listen to everything that you just said. One, I want to unpack, you mentioned B2B, and dang on it if it doesn't drive me nuts if people make this difference between B2B and B2C, because it is just human to human. And it's funny because you mentioned, what are you setting out to be? The thing that I set out to be is to just be myself and to create myself into the best product, to create myself into the best service, to create myself into the best implementer, consultant, coach, mentor that I could be. That's what all the education was for. So if I can be myself and be the best, if your product can be the best, if you can be the best to actually create your product and then sell your product, market the product, you're heading in a very interesting and great way. And the reason I bring up, it doesn't matter B2B or B2C. We've all heard kind of like human to human. Listen, a year and a half ago, I was asked to start a podcast for a company called Marketing Profs. They are a very B2B company, and not start it, but take over because the other person who was doing it moved on to another opportunity. I started doing the podcast. Okay, Joe, just doing a podcast about B2B marketing for B2B marketers. About 9 months, maybe 10 months into just doing a podcast about B2B marketing for B2B marketers, there was a social post that came out that somebody wrote an article, top 12 B2B marketers to pay attention to. And my name was on the article. Now, I never said I was a B2B marketer. I've never said that I'm a B2C marketer. I just say that I'm a human helping people with marketing. But because I was interviewing these other humans around B2B marketing, now I'm somebody to follow around that topic. See, what I'm getting into is people's perception of who you are based on the content that you create and the way that you align yourself with the world. And one of the things that you mentioned in the last section that I want to tie all of this together is, yes, we should have goals, but that's sometimes where it falls apart because we're like, well, how big could it be? How big do we want to make it be? And the honest question to that, or the honest answer to that, is we don't know. We don't know what the market is going to say how big it should be. When I started out doing a podcast, I didn't know somebody was going to say, hey, he's a B2B marketer to follow, to listen to. We don't know. And so sometimes I feel like we get in our way because we do set these goals, because goals are based on a destination that you're trying to reach. Now, if we tie all of this back together and we think about that, we've talked about servanthood, we've talked about adding value. And by the way, I'm not saying you shouldn't set goals. You should set goals. But there's a conversation that is not happening in the business space enough, in the marketing space, in the sales space, in our personal life enough. And that is, with the goals, you should also make promises. Because here's the thing, a goal equals a destination. A promise equals a pattern. I promise myself to do this thing. Therefore, I have to create this pattern in my life. I'm not going to have my cell phone on the nightstand. I am going to go for a walk in the morning. I promise myself to drink plenty of water. I promise I'm not going to spam the crap out of a bot list because I want to actually spray and pray my sales and marketing messaging. I promise that I'm going to do this in a human way. I promise that I'm going to do it in a way that makes people actually not feel icky, because my goal is to reach this or something above it. And
or I
that's the other thing
promise.
around goals is usually we'll set one. I always set three. Here's a good goal. That'd be cool goal. And here's if we ever do that, it'll be amazing. Because again, you have to have a range, right? Even if you get close to the goal, it's still success. It's still a victory because it gave you a bullseye, a place to aim. But the trenches, the real important part of this is what promises are you as a human willing to make? What promises are you as an organization willing to make? What promises won't you break that you're making to the potential prospect leads and customers? Now we're getting into something that gets powerful with consistency and content and authenticity, patterns, goals, promises. Now we're starting to get into some real stuff versus, hey guys, we need to sit down and create a strategy so that we can do some tactics and maybe sell some stuff.
Well, and again, it's right. Like I completely agree. It's a piece of what you do as an organization, as an individual. I really enjoyed kind of that viewpoint, because to me, when you talk about goals versus promises, essentially what you're saying is, and you're right, goals are a destination that when you get there, like you accomplish it, right? But the very next question is, well, now what? Right. And it's the same experience that we each have individually as human beings throughout our life, right? Whether it's a goal to go run a marathon or to lose a certain amount of weight, or, to go make a certain amount of money, like if and when you get there, it almost never lines up with like, okay, I made it, now I'm going to die. Right. Like it's always the very next question is, well, now what? And so to your point, the promises, and really when you look at it, whether it's through a business lens or a humanistic lens, the promises are essentially, how do I operate? Like that's what it boils down to. And to your point, the promises that you keep, how are we going to do right by our clients? How are we essentially going to operate so that we can make that difference, so that it becomes significant, like you mentioned, right? And I think the other very interesting point, and something that I've seen, is number one, as soon as you stop worrying about, hey, how big can I go make my client book, you come to realize you've got a way better sense and a way better viewpoint on customer fit. But secondly, it has the adverse effect, because you go, yeah, I want to focus on what I do really well. I want to focus on really serving the folks that fit within my organization. And the next thing you know, you're having a happy problem. That's like, I got to turn people away because so many people want to come work with me, or so many people want whatever it is that we're doing over here, because they see the power of that significance. And so it's reversal, right? And like, I would be shocked if this kind of conversation's happening at a boardroom level where they're going, yeah, instead of trying to grow our book of business, let's just figure out, how can we grow that relationship? How can we do better and consistently do better by the folks we've already got?
Yeah. Don't let them slip out the back door and always try to be pushing more people in the front door. But I'll tell you where my brain goes with that conversation too is Joe, it amazes me how when we set these goals, especially for sales teams, and they're not reaching them because we've maybe not paid attention to how we're setting them, or we've set them too high, they're not reaching them. All of a sudden, we've trained that human to be living in a world of lack. And when you live in a world of lack, you are more willing to do things that feel less human, which then is counterintuitive to actually where you're trying to get. But if they were in the boardroom and they're, let's focus on just building the best people ever. Let's focus on building the best product ever. If there were these promises and these goals were actually set up in a different way, dependent upon the organization, that allowed sales reps and marketing teams to have communication out of abundance, it is a dramatically different conversation. Look, over the last year and a half, many conversations I've had are from a place of abundance. Very, very few are from a place of lack. And to see the dramatic difference when one happens versus the other if we could somehow get organizations to look at their marketing teams different, to look at their sales teams differently, dare I say, make it into a revenue team and set it up in a way where it's focused on the scalpel, it's focused on the problem, it's focused on the people, it's focused on the patterns, and allow everybody to lean into this layer of abundance communication moving forward, they wouldn't even worry about the old way once they saw how impactful the new way was. I told you, Joe, that I set 3 goals. When we started the business, we did the 3 goals. Hey, we need this to survive. This would be kind of cool, like cream, baby. Let's go. We'll never do that. We'll never do that, but we're going to put that goal out there. We sold that 3rd goal by the 3rd month. So are your goals limiting you and your team in the way that you're doing it right now? Would it be better to look at what you're doing and seeing if this is the perfect time to pivot or transition into a better way for your marketing and sales teams? I can't answer that for the viewers or listeners, but it's something that I would at least hope they would stop and question themselves and think about, that it would become a conversation in the boardroom of like, hey, are we just doing it this way because it's always been done this way? Like, do we have the cannolis, I'll say, because I like a good cannoli. Do we have the cannolis to try something different and then just see what happens?
Well, it's a good point, right? And like, I think to clarify, because for some, what you just said comes across as, and I don't believe this, but I would clarify that it's not a message of complacency, right? And it's not, hey, well, we've made it, so, we're all done kind of deal. In fact, it's the complete opposite. It's kind of, to your point, operating from a position of abundance, or operating from a mentality, I would argue, of abundance, allows you to see things a lot differently. And it allows you to put that service element first, right? Instead of, oh, I got to go get that nut. I have this need that I have to go and do. And in reality, what it ends up being is, well, we've been really successful doing these things, and we're super excited about the progress we've made. And this is really our strength. Like, this is where we want to focus. And, it's one of those things where if you take it from a perspective of, well, we've only actually captured a very small percentage of the total addressable market, versus, hey, we've done great things with the folks that we've been able to address, to the point where that relationship has never been stronger. Our folks are more fired up to come in and figure out, how can I provide additional value? How can I be there at a humanistic level to really be able to resonate with these clients? Makes a hell of a difference. Because the other thing that folks really like downplay is, as human beings, we're social beings, right? Like, there's nothing stronger than a word of mouth referral. And so, like, when you kind of, and again, it's one of those things that's very difficult to measure. Like, I had an old colleague of mine that once said, the best things to measure are usually not the easiest ones, but it doesn't make them any less important. And at the same time, it should not deviate, the direction that you're on, the path that you're on, simply because you don't know what you don't know, and you can't necessarily track it.
Yeah, there's 2 things I want to throw in here. I love this conversation, by the way. One, if you have not read the book Referral Engine by John Jantz, it is an absolutely amazing read about how to actually turn the people that you have built trust with, have built reciprocity, have started to help solve their problems, how it can be a referral engine. And it is like, listen, 80% of our business is referrals. Sure, yeah. We get some from organic. Sure, we get some from social. But because of that decade of doing what we've been doing, we get a lot of referrals in our business. The other thing that I want to lean into that I find funny in several different layers, but pertaining to this conversation, I had probably been in business for 6 months and had to hire my wife and my daughter for project management and billing support because we were just so dang busy. And I'll never forget, one day I came out of my office and my wife said these words, and these are the words that I would hope that every CEO, C-suite, marketing, whoever, sales, I hope they hear these words and understand what I'm trying to say. I walked out of my office and my wife looked at me and said, "I don't think you have any clients." I said, "What are you talking about?" She goes, "You have friends that like to pay you money every month." Because she would watch these meetings and she would see the way that we would interact and talk about business and talk about life and talk about the human level of what we were trying to do, instead of just this kind of agenda based, here's the 5 things, see you next week, hope for the best. Brr, 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 brr. Like, her perception was like, man, these people fundamentally love to hang out with you. And if organizations can get sales reps, marketers, service folks to the point where they love what they're doing so much, they're passionate about the product so much, they enjoy the services that they're providing so much, that people feel that energy. And it's just like, man, I love calling support. Support is the best. Or I love when we can get on a call with Bobby because Bobby's an amazing human. Like, this is the secret sauce, right? And again, can you measure the fact that they feel like friends and don't feel like clients? Not really. NPS maybe, but it's not really. But when you can see it, when you can feel it, when you just know it's a little bit different, now you're like, okay, how do we make this happen across our organization? Because Bobby over there, man, he's had clients for 5 years straight. Everybody else's run is about a year and a half and they end up disappearing. How's this happening? And start watching Bobby's meetings. And they're talking about the kids and the beach and the next feature that came out. And all of a sudden you realize somebody's being human. They're not being a sales marketing robot. Watch out. They might actually grow.
Well, exactly. Right. And to kind of land this thing, you bring up a good point. And I think, and you mentioned it earlier on too, and it's unlocking that level of vulnerability. We're all human beings. There are things that when they go bump in the night, we get uneasy about, but at the same time, we get really excited and we get pumped up. And there are things that really get the gears turning too. And being able to unlock that from a relationship level, I think makes or breaks those kinds of engagements, right? And like, we talks about, instead of trying to drain the ocean, like go fill up a glass of salt water and see what you can come up with, right? And in the same sense, the further down that you can go and build the relationships that you have existing, the easier it's going to be to kind of hold on to those. But then you'd be surprised at like how many things just kind of drop into your lap where it's like, hey, I don't know if you guys do this, but like, this is the issue that I'm having. And all of a sudden it's, well, that's a good point. We do that, but we've never talked about this. Let's figure this out together. Like I'm personally vested in your success and figuring out, whether it be professional or personal, how can I be of service? How can I be there to, again, play that role of support agent? And so, I want to land this by saying, you've got a lot on your plate right now, George, and you're certainly, you're beaming, you're grinning ear to ear. And so when you think about, the last 10 years, I would charge you to think about what's the next 18 months going to look like for George B. Thomas.
Yeah, I don't even, I can't fathom. I honestly, I've come to the realization because of the last 10 years and especially the last year and a half, I have no idea what the next 18 months will look like. The only thing that I know is that I will continue to find ways to help humans. I will continue to find a way that I can scale this business that I've been blessed with. I will continue to try to make an impact in the world and be significant to personal relationships, professional relationships. In other words, it's really for me about cultivating relationships. I just am fascinated with the humans, the minds that we have, the things that we accept and don't accept. I know we're on a professional kind of interview around marketing, but my personal podcast talking about, beyond your default and being a high performer and living the best life that you can live. While it sounds like it has nothing to do with business, It actually has everything to do with business if you're doing it in the right way. And it's funny because for a decade, I've been trying to help humans with HubSpot, created many tutorials, about 2,000 video tutorials, been on many podcasts. But now, if I look at the next 18 months, yes, that will continue. But there's this other underlying piece that I'm really passionate about. And that's it. Now it's just time to help humans. Because fundamentally, if I can get more humans to be good humans and understand basic principles that work in business and work in life, then the other stuff is going to be easy, right? The how do you use HubSpot lists and automations and emails to be more human when you're a good human is easier than like slapping somebody's hand and be like, stop it. Stop spamming that trade show list. Like I'd like the first conversation versus the second one. The other thing I will say, Joe, is I'm definitely in a place in life where I'm trying to do everything I can do not to limit where I believe I can go. This is why I had the whole goals, destination, promises, patterns. I'm making a lot of promises to myself. George, I promise you're going to be this kind of guy. I promise that you're going to do these types of things. But the last thing I'll leave the listeners and viewers with is that one thing that I am finding, and I'm definitely, it's a mini message that I'm trying to put out there, is so many people in life are just, they're a wall. They're a wall. They don't want to move. They're set in their ways. They're very concrete, hard. This is how it is. Very binary, black or white. They're a wall. For me, life is more about being a wave, understanding when it's low tide, understanding when it's high tide, understanding when there's a storm, what direction in, and being able to move with the things that are happening around me. And this is so important to understand, especially in the marketing and sales space, because you have to be fluid. You have to be able to move. You literally said, oh, well, we don't normally do that, but right? The wave comes over. It's listening to the human. It uses its strategic brain. It figures out a solution. It gets it back to normal. And then you wave back into your normal service offerings versus, nope, we're a wall.
That's right.
We don't do that.
Well, George B. Thomas, everybody. And again, George, thank you so much for taking the time to kind of sit down, let me stir around and pick some stuff out of your brain. It's never a dull moment, and certainly never anything less than enjoyable whenever we get a chance to connect. So again, thank you so much.